but I think we'll just wait a little bit longer before we start. So bear with us a few minutes longer, and then I will introduce the two speakers. People might jump in halfway through, actually. They sometimes do that. So, is it 6 o'clock now? Not quite. Okay.
Yeah, 2 minutes.
People tend to be a little bit late on these things, I think. So we'll give it a few minutes, John and Brian, if that's okay.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll just wait for a few more people to come in. We've got, well, they're coming in. That's great. They could turn their cameras off, did they? No. This is a new thing for me, so bear with me if I'm technically a little bit incompetent. Hi, I got a wave from somebody. Anybody who wants to wave? Great. So my idea on doing this is actually to practice the whole Zoom forum and to go forward and perhaps do some more Zoom events like this, given these very strange times that we're living in, that we can't actually meet up properly. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and we have had some great inspirational speakers, and we've had crowds of thousands of people to some of them, sort of anywhere from 50 to 1,000 or 5,000 with Eckhart Tolle once. But I've never done a Zoom before, so this is my first Seminars.ie first Zoom, and John and Brian have very kindly agreed to be part of it. So bear with us if we have any technical hiccups, but you're all very, very welcome. And I see more and more people are joining us now, so I think we'll be able to start fairly soon. Give it 5 minutes to get a few more people. And then we will start. So Brian, I might as well ask you about your book again, because I was a bit confused when I looked on Amazon, and it said $121.
Well worth it.
I will introduce it again, but I know it's a great book. Will you tell us something about it while you're there on screen?
Yeah, it's called Your Beautiful Life, a Gift, and it's probably quite appropriate for these times, because what it's saying is that it's an invitation to make the most of every day. So there are 31 parts to it, one for each day of the month, and each day has a theme, and it's an invitation to see every day as an adventure,
Yeah.
as something to be enjoyed, but also lived to the full. No day is going to go perfectly according to plan, but it kind of prepares you to see every day as a new day and as an adventure to live life to the full, whatever happens, whatever occurs during the day.
I think it's wonderful. I've seen it, and I think it's very inspirational, and it gives you that lovely ability to live in the present and make every day special. Yeah. Welcome everybody who's come, and we're still waiting for more participants, so I'm just talking to the two speakers while we're waiting for them to everybody to come on board. John, your book, The Governor, do you want to hold that up? Because I thought that was a great book. I know you're very shy about promoting it, but I thought that was a great book.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And I know that's available in Eason's and probably Amazon as well.
Yeah,
say something about it.
It's just an autobiography of my life in prison, which was for about 42 years, and had a lot of different experiences. And I just wrote when I retired 10 years ago this month. I just wrote and recorded my experiences of various different experiences I had in the prison system. And so that's what it's really about, is putting on record, I suppose, a lifetime of working with people in
Yes.
prison, and all
Yeah.
the mental, social and human elements to that, because it's not it.
Yeah.
You know, life isn't black and white, as Brian said. It is, everyone follows, you know, eventually lives a journey and goes on a journey of life that they never intended to, and most people who end up in prison never intended to end up in prison. They weren't born with the ambition to end up in prison, but you know, a small percentage of people do end up in prison, and it's fascinating sometimes to observe how that happened and what happened in their lives to bring them down that road. And so it's like many other elements are for most people in life, you know, where, as Brian said already, you're not really in charge. And so life takes on its own momentum at times and its own direction. And we should be grateful, really. And that's what I was saying at the end of the day. We should be grateful for our health and our ability to live a reasonable, normal life, and to avoid the pitfalls of drugs and prison and violence and all the many elements that are out there and that cause havoc in life for many, many people.
Yeah.
So,
well, it is a great book, and what comes across is the humanity in it. And I think now we're going to start properly now. And as soon as I've introduced you both, I will turn off my video, so there'll just be the two of you on the screen. For all our participants, you're all very, very welcome to this seminar. We've got 50 of you now, so that's fine. I think we'll keep going, and then people can just join in as they come along. My name is Jane Stevenson of Seminars.ie, and I do these events usually live. So this is my first attempt at a Zoom seminar, a webinar. And I'm delighted that John and Brian have joined us today, because I think they're absolutely the right people to talk during these very challenging times of COVID-19, when everybody's in lockdown and a lot of people are under a lot of stress. And they, particularly John, I guess, is very used to lockdown, having spent 42 years in lockdown at Mountjoy, so he says. And Brian is a very inspirational speaker and author of his book, Your Beautiful Life, A Gift. And he's also still advising companies with maybe.ie, Maybe International. It's maybe.ie, where you can order a copy of his book if you would like to get that. And he advises companies on how to be human and to have well-being in the workplace. So the format of this Zoom is really the two, Brian and John will chat. They will talk. They know each other very, very well. They're old friends. And after about half an hour, I reckon, or whenever it's sort of a natural stop, I will come back in. And if you've got questions, please type your questions into the Q&A box at the base of your screen, and then I will put them to John and Brian, and we will answer them live. So if you've got questions, just put the questions in, and then we will answer them after the talk. So that is it. I shall back off now, and you're very, very welcome to join this talk with Brian Smyth and John Lonergan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. I start off, John. First of all, just to clarify, yes, I'm a friend of John's. I'm not a past pupil of his. I may well be, but I don't happen to be one. For John, maybe we might just continue with that point around your experience of people being confined and locked up and locked down for periods. And just in terms of actually coping with that, coping with the same day and the four walls and being confined, which is a little bit akin to what people have been going through. So could you start off just talking about that, about just coping with that, being enclosed, being confined, being limited?
Yeah, I can, and irrespective of how confined you have been, either the people other than those in prison have been over the last 6, 7, 8 weeks, it still is not even closely connected to what prisoners have to cope with, or if you're a prisoner. Because the one thing we have all the time when we're confined in our own home is that we know at least we can open the front door or the back door, and we are free to move out of the house, even if it's only to the front or the back garden. But psychologically, we can move out of our rooms and move around the house. And that element of freedom is something that's denied to people once you're locked up. So that's the difference between being locked up physically against your will and confined in a prison and any other detainment. But there are many other aspects, of course, of the last number of weeks that people would have experienced for the first time ever. The alienation and the disconnection from people, families not able to visit one another and having no direct physical contact with families. That's an element of it. The other thing, I suppose, about the virus that I had mentioned a few times in the recent past is that the one group of people who are serving a sentence in Irish prisons, and indeed throughout the world, who are sentenced to life imprisonment. In Ireland, that sentence doesn't mean you stay in prison for the rest of your life, but the life sentence remains for the rest of your life. But the one thing you don't know if you're serving a life sentence is the day you're going to be released. You have no idea, will it be a year's time, in 6 years' time, in 20 years' time, will I ever be released? And there's a connection between that and the virus, because this is one of the frustrating things for most people, I think, out there at the moment. There's nobody, no matter who they are, can say it'll be all over by. It could be next month, it could be next year, it could be 10 years. And that uncertainty and that element of no definite end to is one of the things I think that's most trying for people. So you do learn, though, I suppose the other thing then is, and people already have, I'm sure, come to this conclusion themselves now, and if you're to say to somebody 2 months ago, you'll spend the next 7-8 weeks confined to your own house, by and large, a lot of people would say that I'd never be able to cope. But people have that capacity and the human ability to cope and to overcome difficulties and to survive and come out at the other end is amazing. And I'm sure some people are actually surprised at how well they have coped, considering how quickly it was bestowed upon us, and we had no real options in it. So it does highlight a number of things: the strength of the human being to survive, to cope with adversity, and then to come out at the other end.
Yeah, and I think that's so true, John. And as you know, I often refer to Viktor Frankl, who spent so many years in Auschwitz, terrible conditions, and he talked about how awful it was there, but that he did learn to cope, and he found meaning while he was there. He found a way of living a meaningful life in Auschwitz, faced with the terror of possibly being exterminated, and in the most awful conditions. And even in that awful situation, he still found a way of finding some meaning. And I know that's an extreme case, but I do think what you're saying is true. I'm not being preachy here, but it is possible for us to find meaning in virtually any situation, even in simple things. And I'm sure many people like myself have discovered just how lovely some things are that we hadn't noticed before. Just a little walk, or somebody saying hello to you, or minor things, but they're there, and they're there every day. And I would hope that this period would give us a greater appreciation for just the little things of life, and being able to cope and to make the most of every day, whatever happens. But I'd like just to go on to that point about uncertainty, because that's one of the biggest things I think about this, John. And there's a bit of an illusion about certainty anyway, about being in control and being certain. Now we're faced with uncertainty. We don't know anything about what's going to happen in virtually any sphere. So do you want to say something about coping with uncertainty and what this might bring us back to a realization of how much uncertainty there is in life?
Yeah, Brian. I've often reflected on that very point. And I have often said, because I often hear people talking about other people being vulnerable and all that sort of stuff, and I always took almost offense to that, because what I often said was every single human being is vulnerable, and every human being is fragile in all sorts of different situations. And we should never feel, at the moment, it's sort of thing, well, the vulnerable are people at a certain age or in a certain situation. The youngest person and the oldest person are equally vulnerable, believe me, in certain situations. And there's uncertainty and risk in every minute of every day that we live. But the difference between the coronavirus and all the other risks that we have, that we're coping with and living and trying to avoid, is that we're not as conscious of the other risks. So there's a huge emphasis at the moment on the coronavirus, and you will be forgiven for believing that is the only risk out there at the moment, and that if we can avoid that, we're going to avoid every other risk in life. It's absolute rubbish. equally and maybe even greater risk to us out there. And so it is about this thing of accepting that. We are, as human beings, we're vulnerable and we're fragile, and that we are not in control. And you know, it's very hard to get people to understand that we're not in control. We're longing all the time to be in control. We're looking for things that reassure us that we are in control. One thing we're not in control of is our lives. We have no control over how long we live, the quality of that life, and the only certainty. And again, people, you know, in Maury on Tuesdays, or Tuesdays with Maury, that lovely book that was written a number of years ago with Maury, who was, you know, on his deathbed. Maury was very clear about that. He said every single human being knows he's going to die, but no human being ever accepts it. And that's something we're in denial. So coping is you know, it is about that thing of not taking risks, setting out to take risks, but it's accepting that there are risks in life, and every day we live, we cannot get obsessed with just trying to avoid risk all the time, because if we do, we'll survive to some degree, but of course we lose out a multitude in terms of living. And you know, is it more important to live and enjoy life and experience life, or is it, you know, just to survive? And if you ask me what would I prefer, I would prefer every time to live life.
Very good. And I think, John, that this is a time where we can practice that. We kind of have no choice but to accept and live with the uncertainty, and accept that we're not really in control. So I think it is an opportunity for us to kind of come to terms with, and by accept, I mean, not to say that it's okay, but just to believe that that's how it is, and I can cope with it, and I will cope with it. Because, as you said, control is, first of all, it's an illusion. We're not in control. None of us kind of going through life know what's going to happen. And when you look back, you see all the factors that changed and twisted your life along the way. So first of all, it's an illusion. Secondly, it's very damaging to control somebody else and to be in control of things, whether it be nature or children or whatever. But there's a kind of a longing now in society to be in control of children, to be in, so that they turn out well, so that they're okay, in control in schools and education and in work. We need control, etc. And it's terribly damaging. And therefore, I think this is kind of a salutary kind of opportunity for us to just accept that we're not in control, and to live with that risk. Because that's what life is about. And part of that, John, kind of takes us on to suffering. You know, we're in a world where we don't believe in suffering, and none of us like suffering, but it's a natural condition of life, is suffering. So there's pain in this that people have to go through in different degrees. So just accepting suffering as part of life is also part of that risk that you talk about. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And you know, I often say, you know, again, because of the prison experience in particular, you know, I've often reflected on that as well, that you know, families, for instance, often of people who end up in prison suffer a lot in terms of financial difficulties, a whole lot of separation issues, a whole lot of shame issues. There's a whole lot of suffering. You could just imagine the parents of people that end up in prison, or the close relatives of them, and you know, the way they suffer. And then as individual people, we suffer all the time. We're not conscious of it. But we have a great resilience, and that's what's showing up at the moment. It's a great resilience to cope with stuff and to overcome it. And suffering is part of life. Indeed, it's an enrichment in life. You know, if you were never sick, you would never appreciate your health. How would you? How would you have a clue? What does health mean? It's the day you're sick that you realize, my God, my health is so important. And when will I be well again? And suffering is a great reminder of that. It's a great you know, the step to say to you, listen, you're not in control. Go back to our thing on control again. There's a very thin line between being well and being independent and being very reliable on other people, and sickness and suffering in that context. But then there's a lot of other suffering as well. There's suffering in relation to, you know, in terms of relationships. There's instead of quality of life issues. There's a lot of pain and suffering that people experience throughout life. Separation often, There's whole lots of different elements to suffering. And it's just to realize that and to accept it and to take it on board as part of that journey. And suffering is definitely part of that journey. And at times, and very often, it's an enriching part rather than something. Fine, at the time, it's not very enjoyable, but the benefits often afterwards and the realization of how vulnerable we are and how fragile we are, it strengthens us and makes us definitely more considerate, because I hear that a lot nowadays, and during this pandemic, that we're more considerate, we're more concerned about other people, we share more, there's more generosity. These are all coming out of a period of time of suffering, and that for me is amazing as well.
Yeah, and just going on from that, John, one of the things that I'm kind of saying to people is just catch yourself what you're doing now, and don't, when you go back to normal, the good things and the lovely things that you are doing and that you see other people doing, don't lose them, don't drop them, don't go back to normal in that sense. And there's some things that you're not doing, some things that you were doing before, routines and patterns and addictions you were caught into of all different kinds. Can you spot them as well and say, I'm not going to go back to that. I'm taking advantage of this now. It's like a brother of mine who smoked, and he got the flu once, and while he had the flu, he didn't feel like smoking. And he said at the end, well, that's the end of that. I'm not going to smoke again. I'm going to take advantage of this to never do that again. So I think it's a great opportunity, a great kind of gift to us to kind of ask us the question, what are the things that you began doing or found yourself doing or saw other people doing this time that you're going to continue doing? And what are some things that you're going to stop doing that have been forced on you? But John, I think we chatted about the other day was about people working from home. And I was very interested in what you were saying around that, around the challenges of working from home. And I can talk about some of the benefits of doing it because I've done it for quite a few years. But can you say a little bit about what those challenges are of this maybe new society where a lot of people are working from home?
Yeah, I'd be worried and concerned a little bit about the stampede almost to force people to work from home. You know, we hear it now by government saying, you know, if you can at all, work from home. And while, again, you talk about the positives, the negatives of that, if you're working from home, it's often impossible to distinguish what part of your day is your working day, what part of your day is your family day, what part of your day is for all the other different things. And it requires, in my view, a great discipline. I think it also removes a lot of social contact and psychological stuff as well as emotional stuff. That when you get up in the morning and you go to work, and you come home in the evening, there's a structure to that. You meet people. So work isn't just about income. Work is also about living and the excitement of sharing with people. There's very little excitement of sharing your work on a screen, sitting in a bedroom or sitting in a living room on your own. Then the demands that people have, I've already heard people talking about it. The expectations that other people have of you when you're at home. They send you an email. They expect you to answer the email instantly. You're at home. What are you doing? Why haven't you answered my email? People at home. Mind the children. I'm working, but you're at home. So, and you can imagine the frustration and the stress of that. All sorts of different demands on you, and you're enclosed in the same space all the time. And so I would be saying, you would have to be very disciplined if you're working at home. You have to have a strategy, communication at home. If you're sharing a house with a partner or with children or whoever else, if you're more than one person, communication is vital, that people understand and that you have a schedule and a discipline, that I'm working at this stage, I'm off at that stage, whatever it is. And the final thing I'd say is it's so important that if you're working from home, that you get out of the house physically at least twice every day, just physically, just get out, because your brain and your mind and your body and every element of you need that space again to get out of, because a house can be a very, very confined place, and to be there 24/7 is certainly not in the best interest of your health. So you have to be very much conscious that while you're at home, you must also be conscious that you can, walk down, almost sleepwalk into. I know some people, finally, just to mention this, as well, that you must finish work at a certain time, and that's it. The same as you finish work in your office or in your factory, whatever it is. I know people that are going around at 11:30 at night with the laptop on their lap, still working away and doing things, and that ain't healthy. And it's not healthy for relationships, and it's certainly undermining the positives that are coming out of the current time, where particularly parents of young children have far more time to spend quality time with their children, and those requirements are still there. I would say even more so if you're working from home.
Very good. And one of the things that I see is that this is going to require a different way of managing people, which of course is my whole area, and it's going to force companies and managers into having to trust their people, which they should be doing anyway. But now they're going to have no choice, and therefore to trust them, they have to have people believing that this is worthwhile, and what you're doing is worthwhile, and what we're doing is worthwhile, and it's a cause worth going. But there's good news also in the working from home thing, because I've done it. One is that you can waste an awful lot of your life at work, which doesn't mean you're actually working. People, when they cross the threshold, I'm at work, and therefore whatever I do, I'm working. When you are working from home, you can, I'm a very too disciplined a person, but you can map out your day so that when you are working, you are working. And this leads to an enormous, first of all, improvement in kind of productivity or efficiency. And I don't mean 10%, I mean twice as much. Days when I'm not organized, I would say I'm doing about a half or a quarter of what I achieve when I am organized. But secondly, if we manage it well, as you were saying, John, then we could get our work done in a far shorter time than spending the 8 hours or 10 hours away from home. We could, if we manage it well and discipline ourselves and enjoy what we're doing. And for that, like I say, I divide my day into segments, but there's so much you can get done in an hour, so much. Whereas if you just take on a task, it can take 2, 3, 4 hours. So I think there are big opportunities here, big challenges for companies, and big opportunities for people for people at work to make more of themselves and to have more free time as well by being more effective or more efficient. So, John, another thing I wanted to ask you about is just it's allied to insecurity, but just the fear thing. Fear is a huge factor in all of this, and we have to cope with this fear. At the moment, it's like as if we kind of think we can have a life where we can insure ourselves against everything. You get a house broken into, did you have insurance? A little fire, did you have insurance? Did this happen? Car, did you have insurance? And it's like as if we can iron out any of the creases and fears from life and have a perfectly safe life, which is not the case. So we are dealing with fear now, and we have to again become better at that, don't we, of handling fear.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that as well, Brian, because we need the whole operation at the moment, the whole philosophy underpinning the government's response to the coronavirus, not just in Ireland, by the way, but throughout the world, is exploiting fear. I mean, they're putting the fear of God into people. Now, I'm not questioning their motive for doing that, because naturally you have to in some ways put some fear into people if you want them to carry out certain instructions like social distancing, like staying at home except for exercise, all those sort of things. But there comes a time, and it's coming up shortly, when I think governments all over the world, and including Ireland, need to back off a little bit from that and start giving people, you're saying about people at home and employers giving more responsibility to workers and accepting that they will be responsible and reciprocating that. And I think governments need to start doing that very shortly as well. Give us give us the information, the facts, the percentages and the mathematics of it, and then leaving it more and more to people to decide for themselves whether or not I'm prepared to take the risk. There are hundreds of risks every day. We have mentioned it already out there. A risk around so many different areas, and if you were to consider all the risks, you'd never leave the house. But even if you stay in the house, you're still at risk of certain things. You could fall down the stairs and break your back. So even though I'm at home all the time, so we have to be able to cope with fear. We also have to be able to decide what element of that fear is actually real. And even with the coronavirus, the number of people in the population throughout the world, a little over 4 million people in over 7 billion people have got the virus. So if you were to look at it from a mathematical perspective, it's not any bigger than a lot of the other illnesses and viruses that have been there over the years. And we have to put it into perspective after a while. And we have to say, well, what risk am I prepared to take? And if I'm prepared to take a risk, taking into consideration all the health information that's there, well, then that's it. And I think it's very important, to give back more autonomy and more responsibility to individual people. I know there's a public health dimension to it, but once a stage will come when people will have to be given responsibility themselves, given the information factually. And it will be very interesting to show up every night the number of people who have died from the coronavirus and the number of people who have died from other diseases and other illness. And that would put a balance into it. And wouldn't be putting the fear of God into people all the time, that if I get the coronavirus, I'm dead. Well, of course, you're not dead. 85 to 90% of people who get the virus will not even be sick with it. So that's not encouraging people to get the virus, but it's just putting it into perspective and taking on board that fear is out there. We should be fearful of lots of things. And, but we're so conscious at the moment of fear that some people are almost afraid to come out. And that's not healthy either. So we have to balance that message with the facts, I think. The facts are this, and these are the chances of an individual getting something, and now you make up your own mind.
Very good. I agree completely, John. And fear is such a deep thing in all of us, and we run from it. Somebody saying recently that the word "don't be afraid" is mentioned 141 times in the New Testament alone, and it's in every tradition. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And it's about trusting. Now, we've lost a lot of our kind of faith in the mystery and religion and so on for all kinds of good and bad reasons. But with that loss also comes the emptiness of trying to be in control and fearing everything and preventing anything that could go wrong, instead of trusting that it will be well, everything will be okay. And most of the things that we're afraid of don't happen. But if we get in the grip of fear, then it's very inhibiting and debilitating, and reduces life. And we kind of have that health and safety society.
That's huge detrimental consequences for our well-being and our health, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes physically even, because if we are so terrified. Be constantly fed and indoctrinated and encrypted with fear, and that message of fear is also going to cause a lot of consequences mentally, physically, emotionally. And I would be particularly sensitive about young people. When I see young people being pulled by parents across the road to get social distancing in, I'm sure young children are confused. What's wrong with me that I have to be dragged away from people? I see, adult people jumping out of the way of children as if they had some, that there were terrorists coming against them. That's like psychological damage that I believe can accrue from that type of an over-obsession with fear. Avoiding things and protecting yourself within reason is reasonable, but overdoing it, and the messages then for young people and children especially, you have to be careful about that because of the long-term psychological damage that could be caused.
Very good. One of the things, John, that in terms of when we get back to normal, I keep saying, what kind of normal are we going to get back to? And there's an ad by a particular institution, which I don't actually believe, but the ad is something like, we're all in this together. Well, we are now, but will we be all in this together when we go back to normal? Because that's the kind of society we need, where we are all in this together. We really are in this together. But that could soon quickly disappear when we get back to our jobs and to our work and to our businesses, etc. And we believe that we can stand on our own 2 feet and we don't need people anymore. Because all around me, just neighbors are so helpful in terms of offering to do things. And it is really like a spirit of we're all in this together. But I would hate if that disappeared. I would hate if the normal returned, if we did get back to the old normal. I'd love us to have a culture, a society, and a vision for our people where we really are all in this together. And I was reading some analysis about why the virus hasn't done nearly the same damage in the East as it has in the West. And one of the conclusions was that they do have this idea of we're all in this together. The Chinese have it very strongly, Japanese have it, Koreans have it, etc., Filipinos have it. And the numbers there are just so low compared to here, because they do think in that way. They do think as a family, as a society, as a group. And we're kind of forming new government now. And I would just love if we had a vision for our country where we are all in this together and we're not going to ignore people. Because you hear stories of, it's okay for you to say that if you had 5 people alone in a small little one-room apartment, yeah, I agree, but that should never be. Either with a virus or without a virus, we should not have those conditions in a well-off country like this, etc. So I'd love us to learn from this and to come out with that spirit of, yes, we are all in this together, and I'm not going to go it alone again, and I am dependent on other people, and to try and work towards that kind of society.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess as well, Brian, that we have spoken about this ourselves several times. I mean, that's the very fundamental philosophy of community. That's what community was about, is about, and will be about. And I think it's fair to say that over the last 20, 30 years in particular, and the last 20 years, very, very much so, we have definitely lost that sense of community and that sense of identity. And it is reassuring and refreshing now to hear communities becoming proactive again and taking an interest in each other and sharing their time. I came from a little place called Banshee in West Tipperary, where Muintir na Tíre was very, very evident in my childhood, and the philosophy of Muintir na Tíre was very much the parish council, the local parish, the local community, where people cared and shared. And that's exactly what they're doing at the moment, caring about others and sharing, and particularly sharing their time and visiting people and looking out for people. And that is something that we should learn from. The time as well, the quality of life. I think lots of people are beginning to realize like that all the rushing about and all the consumerism and the rushing, it is meaningless really. And lots of people are beginning to realize, gosh, there are other things like the time to spend with people, the time to relax. And personally, for instance, I noticed, because I monitored it through a Fitbit, over the last month, my sleep has improved immensely now. I'm talking about immensely. And I was reflecting on that. And the reason for that is because I have nothing on anymore in the next day. I have to get up early or anything. So my mind now, when I go to bed, is obviously 100% relaxed, which is sending a message. You listen, go and sleep properly. So the quality of sleep has improved immensely. I'm sleeping over 8 hours every night for the last 23 or 4 nights. Now that is amazing, but it's linked to the psychological thing and the mental thing. And if you go to bed all anxiety, full of anxiety and bunch of you're not going to sleep, and sleep has a detrimental effect on your life. So there's so many different little messages coming out of this lockdown that we should take on board and say, right, if my quality of life is better, why should I allow work to ruin all that again? While work is very important and we never understate it and undervalue it, work should be always only one element of your life. There are other equally important elements, and it's getting that balance right and looking out for others and supporting others. And if you share and look after others, when your day comes, you shall be cared for. And that is a great philosophy. You care for others now, when you're young and active and healthy. And that was the philosophy of Muintir na Tíre. When you're sick, somebody who is healthy will look after you. But when they are sick, you look after them, and you rotate that all around. And so it is a lovely message that when you have something and to give to others is a great reward, and it's good for you and good for your soul and good for everything.
Very good.
John, I think that's a wonderful message. I love that. It's the whole thing about sharing and caring and people looking after each other. There is, of course, the other side of it slightly, that you have the curtain twitchers who are reporting on people who are allegedly not going outside their house when they should be, and I find that's a rather awkward and scary side of it as well, because the sharing and caring is fabulous, but the curtain twitching, what would you say about that? I mean, I just find that very...
Well, yeah, I think I must say that on a couple of occasions that he was asked, the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said that he wasn't in favour of that. However, the Garda Commissioner urged people to do that. So you had two different messages. I think myself, again, if you have proper community, if you have cohesion in a community, you never report somebody. You might have a word with them or a chat with them and say, listen, is it wise doing that? Or, you know, and again, if you come back to this whole idea of community and caring for the community, well, then obviously that would be part of the responsibility. There's responsibility in this as well. But I'm not a great believer, I'm totally opposed to that idea, because that divides and causes anger and frustration, fragmentation and bitterness. And it often reminds me of industrial disputes. And when you have people who maybe sometimes work during an official industrial dispute, and when they come back to work afterwards, and we say you have staff on strike came back, the anger and the frustration and the bitterness that's there as a result of that, it would take, and it has taken years to get rid of. And the same in community, that type of stuff would take ages to eradicate it again. So my view is that if you have proper community and cohesion, people will be conscious that my behavior is damaging somebody else. And if they are doing something that they're not conscious of sometimes, that somebody else will be able to say to them in a nice, respectful way, you know, I suggest to you that that's not a good idea to do. Or let's work on this together, as Brian said, and let's be together on this rather than divide and conquer, because I'm not a believer in divide and conquer.
No, exactly. No, I mean, you're clearly not. I have a question coming in from Bar Fitzpatrick. What about the message for nursing homes coming from this corona experience in terms of caring for the whole community? Are these care homes really caring?
Brian, do you want to?
That's a difficult one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the facts or the figures would suggest that they're not very caring. I'm kind of loath to be critical of people at the moment. People got lots of things wrong and made lots of mistakes, and I'm sure there's loads of room for improvement in nursing homes, and I'm sure the whole private thing has probably led to maybe a lack of care as well. But I'm loath to jump on people with the facts and figures of what has happened and kind of punish them for it. I'm sure they're sorry as we are. I'm reluctant now to be kind of too critical of it. Apart from just making sure that care, no more than prisons, no more than water, no more than anything else, remain in control of the state and government and not in control of private hands, private companies, because the profit motive comes in there and can put money before people, as is par for the course for business organizations.
Yeah, Jane, my own view on it is, again, I think irrespective of whether they were public or private, I think they were left isolated and very vulnerable. The owners and the staff in nursing homes, and they hadn't the expertise, they hadn't the knowledge, and it wasn't something they were dealing with on a regular basis in the past, and so it hit them very quickly, and they hadn't got the basics, even medical support, personal protection equipment, and all the other supports as well. Then some of the staff got the virus themselves, and that meant that a huge number of staff had to go, remain at home in isolation, and that caused staffing issues. The HSE had a big campaign of recruiting, and some of the staff on the nursing homes went into better paid jobs in the HSE, and that stripped them of more staff. So I think, as Brian said, I think when this is all over, or when the most of it is all over, there is definitely a need for everybody, in a positive way now, not a critical way, to analyse what happened. We never had the experience before, but we might have it again. And one of the greatest learning things of all is to look at what happened, pick out the things that we did well, and we obviously did some things well, and equally though, pick out the things we didn't do so well. And certainly, I think, and again, we have to say this, Ireland was not the only country that had massive difficulties with the older people in nursing homes and in care centres. And I think we do need to learn from that. That if we were found wanting as a society, and I think we were, that we won't be found wanting again if we have to face it again, and that we will ensure that where the real vulnerable issues are, that they are dealt with and addressed. We hadn't got the chance to plan it the last time, but we won't have an excuse the next time.
Good. Yeah, very good. Janie Lizar says, chatting with somebody today about working from home, and as a young parent, my dear friend said for him, he no longer works from home, he is parenting from work. He is parenting from work. An interesting perspective. So it's turning it around.
If it can be done, and I mean, I'm sure there's some elements of that can be done. Depends a lot on the job. Another point I wanted to make as well, Jane, just because this is to be reassuring to people. A lot depends as well on the type of accommodation you're living in. Like if you have a reasonably big home where you can get a room or a bedroom, use a bedroom in isolation or whatever, if you have to work in privately. You know, if you're in a very small accommodation unit where maybe with small children, with noise and with all that, I mean, your circumstances will have a big bearing on it as well. You know, if there's only adults in the house with you, well, you have a better chance of being able to organize things in a very sort of a regimental way. If you have small children, I know my own my grandchildren are in England at the moment, and they're living in a house where the father is working from home. They find it very difficult to understand. You know, he's up in the room. Why can't we run up and join him when he might be on a very important phone call or something? Sort of stuff, it can be very, very difficult for children to understand, for the person who's working to understand and all that. So this is why I said at the beginning, communication is so huge that people would sit down and try to understand each other and try to agree some sort of a process that, you know, I'm going to work from 11 or from 9 to 11 and don't disturb me or whatever, so that there's not this, because it could cause a lot of hassle and tension and friction.
I think routine and structure has become very important. Routine and structure for families and children.
And
I have some more questions here, if you're ready. This is from Anonymous. Does John have any message for students, particularly 6th year in secondary and 6th class in primary schools? They have been coping with a lot of uncertainty and are missing out in the expected rituals at the end of their time in school. That's a good question.
I have two messages. I guess two messages for them. The first message is I think young people have suffered the most during this whole pandemic throughout the world. I mean, we'll just deal with Ireland. I think they've suffered the most because young people are far more socially active. They're out there all the time. They need to be out there all the time, meeting their friends, having fun, enjoying life. From 12 or 13 years onwards, it's so important that children and young people have that opportunity. That's all denied of them now. The camaraderie in school is not just the learning bit in school, but you know, the whole camaraderie. Colin O'Rourke, the principal of St. Patrick's Catholic School in Navan, has written and spoken very eloquently about that. About it's not just the education, it's the whole social thing of meeting and having that buzz and that bit of crack around the place. And you know, it's going on now for months. So young people have lost out a huge amount and have made huge sacrifices. But the other side, which is a bit of a plus, right? And it, you know, it has to be seen like that. We're talking about, you know, learning from life, and that life ain't easy. And I often, when I'm talking to students, I often say to them, life ain't fair. And it will give young people an insight into the, you know, realizing that, well, life isn't as smooth as I thought. There is uncertainty out there. There are difficulties that I have to cope with. And sometimes it does come down to fundamental resilience. I am strong enough to deal with this and to come out at the other end. And there's not a drug for it, or there is not somebody that can solve the problem for me. I have to solve it on my own. I have to live through this. And I think from that perspective, young people will benefit from it. On the other hand, they have sacrificed a lot. So it's you know, there's that, as we said earlier on, there's plus and minuses, and the pluses would be that I think they'll have a greater insight into life, and that life isn't one smooth journey.
Yeah. And I do see.
John, Brian, I have another question on the same vein from Nicola Garrett Ellison. What advice would you have for leaving certs? Did you get that?
Yeah.
What advice would you have for leaving certs? Have I frozen or something? Emma? Okay, can you hear me? Yeah?
Brian?
Brian, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. John, what do you think? I don't have any great advice for leaving certs, I'm afraid.
All right. Well, again, you know, during normal times, I've been lots of schools that speak a lot to 6th year leaving cert classes, and normally I would be telling them about, you know, doing their best and all that sort of thing. The reality today is now quite different. It's a bit out of their hands now, in terms of you know, they're not. Nothing like as much in control as even the old the written formal examination isn't the be all end all either, but at least it has some structure in it. Now they have to depend on their performance over the last number of years and you know, assessment of teachers and all that sort of thing. But I think the one reassurance for them is, should anybody be disappointed with the grades they get from the teachers and from the system and the Department of Education at the end of the day, should they be dissatisfied with it, and should they feel that they could do better in a formal examination, they will have that right. And I think that's a great safety valve for them, that they think they could do better and they would do better. And some of them would do better because, you know, again, Colin O'Rourke has spoken about this and said that he has often experienced this, that in the last 3 months, some boys in particular will really put their shoulder to the wheel from after, you know, maybe February onwards and really commit to study very hard, and they would improve dramatically. And now on this new format, that won't be taken into consideration. But, you know, the reassurance is, but anyway, listen, Jane, the other reassurance that I would give them from my experience is, look, the leaving cert is important, but it ain't that important. And life is still going to be there. And, you know, they mightn't get now what they thought they would like to get, but then if they got it, they mightn't like it anyway. So very few people ever end up doing, you know, what they dreamt they were going to do when they were teenagers. Most of us end up doing things we never dreamt of at all. And that is part of life as well. And what I always say to young people is, you know, grab every opportunity that comes your way and do your very best in every situation. And if you can stand up before everybody, whether it's sport or work or social thing, no matter what it is, if you can look in the mirror and say every day, I've done my best, well, you can't do any more. And I believe that, you know, that the leaving cert, while it's traumatic and difficult for people involved directly this year, and it's not the be all end all, and it's not the end of the world, and they will survive it, and some of them will do fantastically well. Way better than maybe they ever dreamt they will. So I've been all optimists on that front. They have everything, and they're young and they're full of energy, and life will be throwing many opportunities at them.
Well, Nicola, I hope you heard that. But the person who asked the question, I hope you heard that. A question from Amy Solon. I often think about the repercussions of how this will be manifest in society in many years. In Ireland, we are a tactile nation. I wonder what kind of footprint this will leave in years to come, and in turn, how could it potentially impact on mental health?
John, you've got very clear and strong views on this, but I think that's a huge factor. I think in my lifetime, we've kind of evolved from shaking a head at someone with your hands in your pockets kind of thing, to shaking hands, to hugging and embracing and kissing people of the opposite sex, etc. So we've made huge advances, I think, as a people in that sense. And I think that it would have very serious repercussions at every level if we lose that tactile, that warm handling, touching aspect of our being together. I think that will have huge. I just don't think it's on really. Now I know other countries again don't have as much. Again, the East is more bowing and so on than we would have. But I think just the reluctance to be able to pick up a child or to hug someone or put your arm around somebody or shake hands with people, I think would have serious human repercussions if that continued. And I hope it doesn't continue. And I don't think it will.
Yeah, Jane, and I would feel the very same. I must say I'm a very reluctant user of social distancing, because I'm doing it because it's in the best interest of everyone at the moment. But on the long term, the consequences that lady asked down the road, if it persists and if we have a culture developed out of that, well, I think that would be very detrimental to our well-being, emotionally, psychologically, and mentally. I think children, you know, there's a huge amount in that whole personal contact thing, the sense of touch and all that type of stuff. So I believe, I suppose the other thing is though that we wouldn't want to overthink it either, because it could very well be just a passing thing. It could be all gone and down and dusted in 6 months. Who knows? Like, you know, a vaccine or a cure, or it might just burn itself out anyway. When people like me now have lived through, you know, when I was a child, tuberculosis was a huge thing, and people were terrified of it. And for instance, families were afraid to marry into a family where there was a history of tuberculosis. Oh my God, that was mental illness. When I was a child, mental illness had a horrendous, stigma, and people were afraid of anybody, a family even, of people who had, And then I lived in Mountjoy when HIV came on the scene and AIDS, and people were terrified of that, and they wouldn't use the same cup, and there was the same sorts of stuff. They wouldn't touch a person with HIV, and gradually through information and education, we learned, oh no, you can actually cope with that, and you can deal with it, and there is no risk. And it would be fascinating, I think, in 5 or 6 or 10 years' time or 100 years' time, when people look back on Ireland and the world in 2020, they might actually be saying, what were they doing? And we're right in the middle of it at the moment. But we need a bit of history and a little bit of time before we'll be able to put it all into perspective. But I personally would be on the optimistic side, and I would be like Brian. I'd be saying, look, in 5 years' time, I think it will be just a bad memory. But it could be a memory that will be very useful to remind people, like, you think you know where you're going, but don't forget the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And perspective, it could be a very good thing. But I'd be very worried if we, as you said, if social distancing continues on, even for a year more, I think it'll do a lot of damage.
Well, I agree. In fact, the next question is from an anonymous attendee: how long should we expect social distancing to be enforced? I don't know if that's a question you can really answer.
Well, I don't think anybody can. I guess if the numbers disappear, we're down around 50, I think to 64 today. We're gone down very low. If this thing over the next 5, 6, 7 weeks continues on and the virus burns itself out, and some people say it will, the optimists say it will burn itself out, well, then I'm sure that social distancing can be reduced maybe to a metre and another short period of time to nothing at all. On the other hand, if it's still active, I'm sure that social distancing is going to stay in place to some degree for the next number of months until a vaccine or a medical cure comes in place. But I mean, at the same time, we have to be careful. We hear the Minister for, in the Dáil today, Minister for Children in the Dáil today, talking about creches and having all this sort of structure in creches. And we have to draw the line. We've got to draw the line. We cannot, keep this up in terms of, as some people, including Trump, said, the cure sometimes could be worse than the disease. And while we dismiss everything he says, there was some merit in that one comment. We have to be careful that the solution isn't worse than the virus in the first place, because while the virus is there, and we believe that it can be controlled, but we can't allow the virus to take over society completely. And yes,
well, some people are calling it a panic-demic, aren't they? A fear-demic.
Hopefully it is. Hopefully it is, and that it will, like all panics, they'll end. But I suppose the one amazing thing at the moment, Jane, is that no matter who they are, the greatest of all experts around the world in science and medicine, when they're pushed, the one thing they all have to say at the very end, I don't know. And I think that's very reassuring, that nobody knows yet. But eventually we will get to know.
Yeah. Looking back, as you say, we will have 2020 hindsight.
We could be very smart in another year.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Participants, we've got 53 participants, and if anybody has any more questions, we'll take them. Anastasia quickly says, thank you very much for this interesting early evening seminar. We've had a few thank yous from people, and I would also, of course, like to thank you very much. If nobody's got any more questions, we could end it here, unless John or Brian want to say anything further. I would like to thank you very much. I mean, I think you've given your time to talk to us, and I just felt it was a particularly important time to have inspirational speakers like you Oh, here's a question coming through now before we go. Oh, it's thanks. Okay, we've got a few thank yous here. Yeah, which is lovely. And Janie says, thanks, super session. Thank you, Brian and John. Many thanks, Jane, for arranging it. So I'm sure we'll get lots of thanks. But, you know, as I say, I think you two are the right people to talk during these really difficult, troubled times. So let me just make sure that I don't have any more questions. Oh, well, okay, now here's an interesting question. John, how is this situation being handled in prisons?
Yeah, I understand pretty well. I saw yesterday Dr. Holohan mentioned that there were a few clusters in prison, and in Clover Hill prison in particular, that's the remand prison in Dublin. They had a number of clusters in there. Now the clusters will be 2 or more, and as the prison is designed on 3 bed cell occupancy basis, naturally I think you could have quite a number of groups in that category. But generally speaking, the numbers in prison have remained very small. But my understanding is that most of the prisoners are locked up most of the time. And so there's very little interaction. And I think it's only when prisoners are unlocked again and when they have visits and all that sort of thing. There's no visits at the moment, but they're spending probably all their time locked up. And so therefore, and why Clover Hill is probably getting a number of clusters is because people are in and out in terms of remanded into custody, you go to Clover Hill. But generally speaking, the prisons have coped pretty well with it, and it hasn't been a huge issue in prisons when it very well could be. But one of the reasons, I suppose, for that is that prisons are, unlike other places, are very easily places to contain because you can lock people up and confine and control entry and exit. And but so far, and of course as well as that, nowadays medical services and support and all that would be way, way better than they were 20, 30 years ago. So we have quality medicine now and medical services and support in prisons. And I think from that perspective, they probably are better able to cope than lots of organizations outside.
And John, it's very tough on prisoners at the moment because they don't have their usual exercises, their usual physical exercises and education classes, etc. So it's they're locked up for a lot of the time, I understand, from some prisons. It's
huge,
very tough on them.
Huge. And like everything else, I understand as well that quite a number of them would be very fearful as well for their health. They're sort of terrified that they should get it in prison and possibly die in prison and all these sort of things. And that adds to it. And the confinement, you can imagine, as I said to you, psychologically at home, even though you think you might be locked up, the reality is you're not. You can step outside the door. You have that freedom to go for a walk. When you're locked up psychologically, it means that you have no longer any control over your movements. And to be locked up now, in maybe 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, anybody and everybody, I think would find that a struggle. It would be just a psychological and mental struggle to be able to cope. That's when you cope with that, Jane, you cope with anything.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Jennifer McGovern says, do either of you have any books that would be good to read during this pandemic to give hope? Can I suggest you both hold up your books again, as well as perhaps recommending another book? But Jennifer, this Your Beautiful Life by Brian Smyth is a really inspirational day-to-day coping book, if you like. It'll give you inspiration of living in the present every day. And John's book, The Governor.
I don't know about my book for that, but I'm going to hold up this little book here.
Oh, okay. Well, John's book is The Governor, and then we can also talk about this one as well.
Lucy's with Maury. I think that's a lovely little book to read at this time. It'll be very inspirational, and it deals with every aspect of life, including death, which I think was a subject we
Who's the author of that?
It's Mitch Albom.
Okay.
Albom.
Okay.
He was speaking to Maury, who was a professor who was dying on his deathbed. And he interviewed him every Tuesday for weeks and weeks because he was a student. Mitch was a student. And so it's an elderly man on his deathbed reflecting on life. And
it's wonderful.
Really inspirational. I strongly recommend it. Yeah.
There you are, Jennifer. That sounds fabulous. I'd like to get that myself. Oh, and okay. Yeah, Brian has a book, The Denial of Death.
I'm reading is The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. And it's not just about death, but it's about the denial of our vulnerability and the kind of the ways we try to escape from our fear of being human into all kinds of things, and running away from life. So it's a real invitation, as we're saying here, to live with the risk of life, and with the risk of death. And again, just John touched on death. People don't like kind of hear me saying this, but death is not a bad thing. It's a natural thing. It's part of life. There's no life without death. It's a sad thing. It can be a very tough thing, but it is a natural thing. And we shouldn't just see it as something to be avoided at all costs. And then when it does happen, it's a tragedy. It's not a tragedy. It's the way life is, sad and terrible. And I'm not saying that lightly. I have enough experiences of deaths in my own close family, etc. But we have to face up to death in all shapes and forms, both while we're alive, in terms of upsets and disappointments and failures and damages to our ego, as well as the physical death as well. It is part of life.
Yes, I think that's true. The more we embrace death, the more we can live fully, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Anonymous again, what great perspective, and they're just saying what a great perspective. Thank you very much for sharing. Somebody else, I have enjoyed the past 2 months. Life was too fast pre-COVID-19. I am enjoying nature, quality time with family. Can you speak about the positive part of this epidemic? I think you have touched upon that. Would you like to say more about that?
Just one small thing on the children thing. I didn't comment on children and school and education and so on. And I know all of that is true. But at the same time, it's a very resilient age for people. And I've met so many parents who tell me about the time that they're spending with their children now, more time than ever, doing homework with them, etc. I meet people who are saying, you know, my children are working with me, they're coming out with me, they see what I do, they're doing things. So there's a wonderful kind of upside to it as well in terms of young people. But just to go back to the other point about like the questioner said, just getting in touch with nature. Getting in touch with nature is everything. I mean, I'm planting little plants and seeds at the moment, which is a good thing to do. And we have to remember that the poor little seed has to die, it has to crack open and die before new life comes. And I find it wonderfully kind of generous on the part of nature, that it is prepared to die, prepared to go into the cold ground, etc. And so that new life emerges. And I was, reading recently that the baby being born is a little bit like dying, because it doesn't want to leave the womb. It's very comfortable there, and it's coming down a channel, and it's very dark. It's not what it's getting into, and there's huge pain involved in it for everybody involved. But it's very like death. It's the same kind of thing that happens. Maybe it's the same kind of process that we're going into. So that's not to, as I say, to eulogize death or to reduce the sadness and the impact of it. But it's all around us in nature, life and death. It's all around us. My cat catches mice, and the mice eat something else, etc., etc. And but nature, I think, is our big teacher.
Yeah. John, do you want to say any more on that?
I suppose it really forces people to accept and realize that consumerism isn't all that it was promoted to be. You know, when you think about all the big shopping centers, and when you think about all the activities, and now they're idle. There's nobody there, and we survive without them. And the compensation, I think, is that we have more time for ourselves, quality time, and we have more time for others, and especially with children. I think that's experience that young parents will have with young children at the moment. It's immeasurable. And it is education, by the way, because while they're not going to school for formal education, I hear things sometimes that education they're going to get now, walking around in parks and looking at birds and looking at birdies and flowers, that sort of that is real education. And so we shouldn't underestimate the value of that unstructured education, because they're probably learning more in some ways about life, about themselves, about their parents, than they would ever have if we hadn't got the coronavirus.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I have some family who've got small children, and they're absolutely thrilled to have both mummy and daddy at home at the same time, and they're not going off to nursery for a large part of the day. And so this is going to be a big adjustment for them when they go back when they go back to reality again.
I'm sure it's the same. It could be reciprocated for parents who are pressurized because of economics to go out to work every day and to spend hours and hours absent. I'm sure that they are enjoying the contact with their children that much better, and that they're enjoying that whole thing, and they're observing things happening in the developmental stages of their children that they would never have seen were they at work. So there are compensations. Like I've often said to parents, try and be there for every first. Well, if you're at home, even the coronavirus, I guarantee you, if you were a young child, there'll be a lot of firsts. The first word, the first this, and you're there for it. And that is obviously a beautiful memory as well.
Absolutely. An anonymous question, have you got tips for getting out of lockdown? Many people are used to being isolated. So I guess if people are enjoying this time of, you know, because of the quality time with children and nature, etc., the readjustment is going to be quite difficult, perhaps, for some people. Maybe we've covered that already.
You could take it simply again as an adventure and experience the discomfort of it, that this is not going to be comfortable for me. It might seem very ordinary and simple for other people, but for me, doing something that I haven't been doing for 2 months is going to be new, but I'm going to enjoy that newness. I'm going to enjoy that discomfort. I'm going to be proud of that things I see and discover about myself and about what's around me. So again, to see it not as like life has to be perfectly smooth without a wrinkle in it, but that there's a bit of discomfort here as well. And I look forward to that. You know, I often hear, you know, have a good day. What does have a good day mean? Does it mean that everything's going to go perfectly? Not at all. It just means that can I make the most of whatever comes my way today, be it good, bad, or indifferent, and treat it well. So I just would wonder if they can just see that as a new adventure that they never thought that they would have to face, and make the most of it and enjoy the actual challenge and the discomfort of it, childish as it may seem to them.
The book, somebody's asked Monica, the book was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom.
Morrie, Mitch Albom.
Okay.
Fantastic little book, and it's inspirational as well. But it's
and somebody mentioned The Choice by Edith Egar, another very inspirational book. And just to let you know, this has been recorded, so I will be putting it up on Seminars.ie website if you would like to view it again. Raymond said that the audio was slightly soft. I haven't found that, but we will put it up on recording on the website. So it looks like we've run out of questions, and we've been going for a little over an hour. So just maybe one more question. Let me just have a quick look here. No, it's gone. So thank you all very much for joining us. We had a really good crowd on this. It's brilliant, and I'm really pleased it all worked very well. And thank you very, very much, John and Brian, for participating. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure, no problem.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, talk to you, John.
Ending you now.
Bye, Jane.
Bye.